Okay, I think we're going to get started. I know some people are still logging in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, buenos dias, xin chao, ni hao, and namaste. Welcome to all of our amazing early childhood educators and families of dual language learners. Bienvenidos a todos nuestros educadores de educación temprana y miembros de familia. My name is Jacqueline Lopez. I am an early learning coordinator for Los Angeles County Office of Education. I'm so excited that we're launching our county-wide QSLA Dual Language Initiative project and that you have decided to join us this Saturday morning for this occasion. This is an amazing testament to your commitment to our youngest children, our future. Mi nombre es Jacqueline López. Soy coordinadora de educación temprana para la Oficina de Educación del Condado de Los Ángeles. Qué tremendo gusto me da iniciar este proyecto, la iniciativa de estudiantes de 2 idiomas de QSLA, que se llevará a través de todo el Condado de Los Ángeles. Gracias por acompañarnos esta mañana. Es un gran testamento de su dedicación a nuestros niños más pequeños, nuestros líderes de mañana. Thank you to our partners. This could not have been possible without the generous funding of First 5 LA and the collaboration of our partners from Child 360 and Chalkhair Alliance of LA. Esto no hubiera sido posible sin los fondos de First 5 LA, los primeros 5, y de todos nuestros colaboradores, incluyendo Child 360 y Chalkhair Alliance of LA. Just a few housekeeping items before we formally begin. We have Spanish interpretation available. I will take a moment to walk our Spanish-speaking participants through the process of accessing our interpreters, and a big shout out to our interpretation team, Oscar, Rosie, and Dennis. Antes de empezar, tengo unos cuantos anuncios. Tenemos interpretación en español. Para tener acceso a los intérpretes de este evento, tendrán que hacer clic donde ven la imagen del globo, donde indica interpretation o interpretación. Se encuentra en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Cuando hagan clic, elijan Spanish. Muy bien. Espero que hayan obtenido acceso a los intérpretes. Continuaremos con el programa. The second housekeeping item is that we have a Q&A box so you may list your questions that you have for our presenter. We will reserve time before the morning break and at the end of our session for Q&A. Lastly, please note that our session is being recorded today and we plan to make it available for future access. So let's review today's agenda. Keisha Woods will be kicking us off with a formal welcome and overview of our DLL project that we are very excited to be launching today. Following her opening remarks, each of our collaborating partners will have an opportunity to highlight their upcoming professional learning and parent training opportunities. Then Gina Rodriguez, First 5 LA DLL project manager, will introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote will have the opportunity to provide us with a 2-hour presentation. We will take some time to respond to questions listed in that Q&A box right before a 5-minute morning break, and then wrap up the session with Q&A before closing. Hope you enjoy your time with us, and we look forward to this being the beginning of an amazing learning journey and collaboration. Without further ado, I present Keisha Woods, Executive Director of Los Angeles County Office of Education, Head Start and Early Learning Division. Keisha?
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning to everyone. Good morning. And thank you so much for joining us for the launch of the Quality Start Los Angeles Dual Language Learners Initiative. I do miss the days when we could all gather face to face, but I deeply, deeply appreciate your sharing your Saturday morning with us to celebrate this very exciting project. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Keisha Woods. I am the Executive Director of the Head Start and Early Learning Program with the Los Angeles County Office of Education, known mostly as LACO. LACO is the largest regional education agency in the nation, serving all of the county's 80 school districts and nearly 2 million children. We operate the nation's the second largest Head Start program, which serves over 10,000 children and families through a comprehensive prenatal to 5 early learning program. We also have been fortunate enough to lead the Quality Start Los Angeles Consortium. For many of you, you may know it as QSLA. And we've led that for the past few years. Done this in partnership with several other wonderful organizations, most of whom Jackie mentioned earlier, but I'll just briefly say again. First 5 Los Angeles, Child 360, Chalkhair Alliance of Los Angeles, the County Office for the Advancement of Early Care and Education, the Child Care Planning Committee, and lastly, the Partnership for Education, Articulation, and Coordination through Higher Education. Simply said, PEACH. It is through the QSLA partnership that we come together with you today to launch the Dual Language Learner Initiative, a project funded by First 5 California and First 5 Los Angeles. In 2019, 98% of licensed center-based programs across the state of California served at least one dual language learner. And of course, dual language learner is especially important here in Los Angeles County, where more than half of our residents speak a language other than English at home. And as many as 60% of our children are dual language learners. Our county is home to a rich diversity of languages and cultures, and it's vital that our education system reflect and respects that diversity from the very beginning. After all, research shows us that dual language learners have a much greater academic success over time if both their home language and English are supported from an early age. For years, we've seen the research that demonstrates that 90% of our brain development happens in the crucial first 5 years. High quality, accessible early education is the key to lifelong learning and success. It helps children grow socially, emotionally, and educationally for their journey ahead. And our future is brighter when all of our children are able to reach their potential, regardless of the zip code they're born in, the color of their skin. Our language, the language they speak at home is important. Our babies reflect the ethnic, cultural, and linguistic diversity of our communities and our nation. Through this respect and understanding, we celebrate dual language learners and value their strength, value the strength that they embody. A child's family, their home language, and their culture are unique access that they bring to early learning programs. And we can build a better tomorrow when our families, our educators, and the whole society value, share, and respect these assets in our learning communities and beyond. Children who communicate in more than one language possess a strong asset, and it develops from the very beginning of life, as you are very well aware. Again, the research is clear. We know that children who speak more than one language will experience heightened cognitive and social emotional development. We know that the years from birth to age 5 are the most important, a vital time to support language development, optimize the benefits of speaking more than one language. And yet, we are faced with challenges. In the past, early learning programs have not always reflected the diverse character of our children that in the language that they bring from their homes. We have a severe teacher crisis, not enough qualified teachers to support the language development of our youngest learners. This makes it impossible for us to have enough teachers that speak a child's home language in their early learning environment, especially in communities where so many different languages are spoken. In the past, there hasn't always been much attention paid to the unique developmental needs of infants and toddlers who are dual language learners. So our work today or in the future is really helping us put additional emphasis on infant and toddlers. And then our last challenge, of course, is that of the COVID-19 pandemic, something that we're dealing with now, that we've been dealing with for the last year and a half, and impacts that are going to take us well into the future. Thankfully, there are a couple of unique opportunities that are before us today. One is in dealing with the teacher crisis, we can recruit and train a new workforce that has the skill necessary to focus on dual language development for our youngest learners. Secondly, with the teaching staff that we have now, with the administrators we have now, we can harness these opportunities by supporting and empowering you to help you as educators develop more skills and knowledge and cultural humility so that you are able to teach effectively in multilingual settings. Fortunately, we have a strong team here today that will focus on equity, focus on families, and focus on giving all of our babies the best chance to succeed and to thrive. The QSLA Dual Language Initiative that we launched today will provide early learning educators such as yourself with free trainings that address all aspects of dual language learners' development, including language, literacy, math, social-emotional development. The initiative will also offer free workshops for educators to engage with families of dual language learners. And through the initiative, we will connect directly with families. We'll also reach out to the broader community through public awareness campaigns to educate our community and our policymakers about the dual language learners and to celebrate their unique skill set. This is a very challenging time, but also a very exciting moment to be engaged in the work of early learning, supporting our children and families in all of their unique backgrounds. So please stay tuned for our upcoming professional learning opportunities, our parent trainings offered, and just working collaboratively throughout Los Angeles County to build a stronger early learning system. Now I'd like to invite our partners on this dual language learning initiative to each highlight their own offerings. We will start with Dr. Dawn Kurtz, a longtime colleague, love to work with Dawn, an absolutely wonderful person and a strong belief in the support of strengthening the early learning field. Dawn is a Chief Research Officer for Child 360. Thank you, Dawn, for being with us this morning, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Keisha. Good morning, everyone. It's really a privilege to be here with you today, and we really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. Child 360 is a nonprofit organization focused on making sure every child has the educational opportunities they need to succeed in school and in life. We do this in partnership with educators, families, partner organizations like those here today, policymakers, and community members. We have a few different roles on this specific dual language learner initiative. First off, we're going to be providing teacher trainings that are specifically focused on infant and toddler development. As Keisha mentioned, we know that this is a very big need in the field. These offerings will include 2 virtual instructor-led trainings that are coming in late fall, and those will be available both in English and in Spanish. And the trainings will focus on topics such as socio-emotional learning and language acquisition for infants and toddlers. In addition to those courses, we'll be putting those courses on our learning management system, and those will be available as self-paced courses that will be available early in 2022. We're also developing a Directors Institute, which is a 3-part series specifically for directors, administrators, and principals that is aligned with the teacher training curriculum that we'll be describing a little bit later. We recognize that it is very important to reinforce the learning at multiple levels within early learning programs. And so Director Institutes are really an opportunity for us to support administrators in the concepts that are also being offered to teachers, and also support administrators in developing policies and procedures that reflect a commitment to high quality supports for dual language learners and their families. The Directors Institutes will be offered in February through April of 2022. Child 360 is also the lead on the evaluation for the initiative. And so we're working with all of the partners to track outcome data, track lessons learned and successes through a variety of different approaches, including formative, process, and summative approaches. Our first opportunity to collect data will actually come at the end of this event today. So at the end of the day, you'll be asked to fill out a survey. And we're truly interested in your insight and feedback. So we recognize that it's Saturday, but we still hope that you'll take the time to respond to the survey, because we really will use that information in our future planning. And finally, Child 360 is also helping to lead the initiative's public awareness campaign. So we'll be developing a variety of different outreach methods, including a digital TV campaign. And we're hoping to really have a wide reach to help inform the public about what an asset multilingualism truly is. And then finally, we'll be distributing books and other resource materials throughout the community in a variety of different languages. Now I'm going to turn things over to Fiona Stewart from the Chalkhair Alliance, and she can walk you through the supports that they will be providing.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dawn. My name is Fiona Stewart. I'm the program director of the Chalkhair Alliance of Los Angeles, and we are an alliance of all of the child care resource and referral and alternative payment agencies across the county. And we all work together to strengthen families and ensure high quality childcare and early learning across LA County. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our role in this project. We are proud partners of Quality Start LA and the Dual Language Learning Initiative. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is providing family engagement workshops in alignment with the Dual Language Learning Provider Training Series. These workshops will be offered to families in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And all workshop attendees will receive books in their child's home language. The workshop topics will include learning the benefits of supporting dual language development in young children and learning how to support their young dual language learners at home, as well as learning how to effectively advocate for dual language best practices in early learning programs. And in addition, can I go to the next slide, please? Thank you. We're also going to have some train the trainer opportunities. So these will be opportunities for people to become trainers in the dual language family engagement trainings. And these will be for both center-based and family childcare providers so that they have the tools to share information about dual language learners with the families of their programs. All of the trainer sessions will be delivered in English or Spanish or Mandarin. And these will provide information on the dual language learner resources for families and how to effectively share them, and how to offer family workshops in their early learning programs. And attendees of these will also receive the curriculum, as well as supplemental handouts, resource materials, and books to give to their families. And in addition, we'll have some community of practice opportunities for folks who attend these trainings to come together and learn from each other and identify successes and problem solve challenges in sharing these resources with families in their programs. And last but not least, we'll also help facilitate trainings at all of the local R&Rs. So staff at the resource and referral agencies, also known as R&Rs, across LA County will be trained in the different DLL provider workshop series, and then we'll be able to offer these and deliver these across the R&Rs across the county. So we're excited about our role, and we're looking forward to launching this program. And I'm now going to turn it back over to Jacqueline Lopez at LACO.
Thank you, Fiona. Hello, everyone. So my role here is to share the professional development that LACO has been working on and preparing from our very talented group of consultants, and that we're ready to initiate as early as next month, October. So we are currently finishing up the development of the 10-module teacher training series, starting with an introduction module that will be launching in October. And so we'll be releasing the training announcements for that particular module. This module will be available via 2 virtual live sessions in English and 2 in Spanish. Additionally, the introduction module will be recorded and will be available on demand. The completion of module 1 will be required in order for participants to access the other 9 modules. You will not be required to complete all 9, but we certainly invite you to take advantage of as many of those sessions. But module 1 will be definitely your gateway or your entry point to the full series. And then we do have some additional offerings. If we can go to the next slide. And so additionally, our LACO team will also be offering a joint PT session, which will be geared towards the alignment of best practices and instruction for DLLs from preschool through TK and kinder. We also are very excited to support our instructional leads in the implementation of DLL key practices through monthly DLL communities of practice sessions. We will offer a cohort in English, and we will also be offering one in Spanish. Both of these cohorts will be starting in October. And finally, we also will be offering the Train the Trainer series. That will come later next year or late spring from April through June of 2022. So please, please, please register for any of these LACO offerings, as well as any of the Child 360 or Chalkhair Alliance of LA trainings via the QSLA website under the Dual Language Learner Initiative tab. So all of those trainings will be posted there, and it'll provide you access to registration. And now that we have concluded our training announcements, it is my pleasure to introduce our fearless leader with our DLL project initiative, Gina Rodriguez from First 5 LA.
Thank you, Jackie, and bienvenidos a todos. My name is Gina Rodriguez, and I am a program officer with First 5 LA, a leading children's advocacy organization. It's my pleasure to be here this morning, and my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marlene Zepeda, a First 5 LA commissioner, scholar, activist, and advocate for multilingual children. Dr. Zepeda is a professor emeritus in the Department of Child and Family Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. She is a former preschool and elementary school teacher, and her scholarship focuses on dual language learning in Spanish-speaking preschool children and child development in Latinx infants and toddlers. She's participated in various initiatives focused on strengthening early educators' pre-service and in-service professional development relative to dual language learners, or DLLs. Dr. Zepeda led a group of national experts in the development of California's early learning foundations in English language development for 3- and 4-year-olds, the first of its kind in the nation. She also authored various publications and reports focused on the development on dual language learners, including a set of teacher competencies for DLLs and a commission paper focused on workforce development for the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's seminal report entitled Promoting the Educational Success of Children and Youth Learning English, Promising Futures. Dr. Zepeda's early childhood advocacy work includes the development of a policy framework for young DLLs in California entitled California's Gold, an advocacy framework for young dual language learners, and the Dual Language Learner Policy Platform. And I just have to say, yes, indeed, dual language learners and multilingual children are California's gold. Dr. Zepeda participated in California's Master Plan for Early Care and Learning and developed an accompanying policy paper on dual language learners. Currently, she is conducting a research project focused on non-English speaking family childcare providers who serve dual language learners. She is a member of the Campaign for Quality Early Education, a California advocacy group that lobbies on behalf of dual language learners. And she received her BA in Child Development from California State University, Los Angeles, her master's and PhD degrees in Developmental Studies and Early Childhood Education from the University of California at Los Angeles. As you can see, Dr. Zepeda is very accomplished and has vast experience and knowledge. But when I think of Marlene Zepeda, I think of her passion and her tenacity advocating for the young dual language and multi-language learners of Los Angeles and California. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Dr. Marlene Zepeda. Gracias.
Thank you, Gina. I really appreciate those kind comments. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving up your Saturday to be with us. I'm going to be sharing information based on theory, research, and practice that help inform us to understand dual language learners. I've been focused on this topic, as Gina suggested, for many, many years, and I hope you find the information helpful. Before I begin, however, I really want to say thank you in advance for all the work that you do to support our young children in optimizing their development in whatever role you play. You are very important in helping children understand who they are, where they come from, and how to progress in school. So let's go to the next slide so I can go over the presentation topics. So we're going to be talking about very broad topics this morning that you will be getting more detail when you do your own professional development and all of those different PD trainings that were outlined earlier by other people in this group. The 4 topics that we're going to be covering this morning are the reasons for understanding and focusing on DLLs and their families, giving you that rationale. We're going to talk about the importance of language and culture and the relationship between language and culture for the developing child. Then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to talk about partnerships and engagement with families. Families are critical to the success of our children. And then finally, we're going to end by talking about some general teaching strategies. So again, these are very, very broad topics. Each one of these topics could be its own course. And so it will just be an introduction to these areas, and you will get more information about them and spend more time talking about them when you are involved with some of the subsequent training that is going to go on. So let's go to the next slide. So let's first talk about terminology, because there is a lot of confusion and there's different terms that are used in this area. Now, we've been using the term dual language learners, and dual language learners are children that acquire 2 or more languages simultaneously or are children learning a second language while continuing to develop their first language? This is the term. And then the other term that you often hear is English language learners. And that means a child who does not speak English or whose native language is not English and who is not currently able to perform ordinary classroom work in English. This definition comes from the State Department of Education in California. One of the observations that many of us in the DLL world have made is that the term DLL, or dual language learners, is a more accurate reflection of the reality of children being exposed to two languages. And whereas the English language learner term tends to put our attention on English language acquisition and not necessarily on the preservation or the support of the home language. So we really do feel that the DLL term is a more accurate reflection of what is going on. And I want to give a shout out to the Head Start. The Office of Head Start at the federal level has been instrumental in our thinking about dual language learners and promoting best practices for dual language learners. And so we have taken a lot of information from them and really have helped us inform what we do in our work. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the statistics. What are the statistics telling us about the presence of dual language learners in California? Well, one of the things that I often say is that California is ground zero for English learners in the United States, in the nation. 1 in 4 English learners resides in the state of California. Part of the reason for that is we're the most populous state in the United States. And we are more heavily concentrated in Southern California. But in the elementary grades, that is where you'll find the largest proportion of English language learners in K through 3. So that is where we find them, not all across the board. The highest concentration is in the early grades. LA Unified School District, for instance, the second largest school district in the nation, categorizes 25% of their children as English learners. In Head Start, when I've been looking at some data recently with Head Start, 28% of children attending Head Start programs nationally are classified as dual language learners. However, in LA, I was looking at LA County Head Start, LACO Head Start data more recently, and it looked like about 55% of the children enrolled in the Head Start program with LACO were dual language learners, considered dual language learners. That doesn't mean that that represents the concentration across all LA County, but it gives you an idea of the extent and breadth of the children that are considered dual language learners. Now, one of the statistics that is being used quite a bit within the last few years is the 60% statistic, that 60% of all children in California under the age of 5 are dual language learners. This statistic was kind of hard to come by because a lot of our children are not in publicly subsidized programs, and so we don't know the breadth of it. This statistic came out from First 5 California when they were first developing this DLL pilot work that has funded this important initiative. And they came up with a 60% using census data. And you'll see that reflected in a lot of the rationale. So why is the 60% important to recognize? Because the majority of California's children are dual language learners, are coming from homes where at least one parent does not speak English. And we have not really been considering these children to a large degree in much of our early childhood work. And we need to really have DLLs as central to the conversation in all early childhood policy and practice going forward. Next slide. Okay, so where are our DLLs located? Here you have a slide on diversity and location of English learners in California. So this is primarily K through 12, not necessarily 0 to 5, but it gives you an idea of where they are. Now, there are over 200 languages that are spoken in the state of California. The State Department of Education collects data on about 75 languages. I'm pushing my notes. And the vast majority of children in California speak Spanish, over 80%. And that's followed by Vietnamese, Mandarin, and Arabic. Arabic has risen to the top 4. What I have seen in the past is the Korean and Tagalog have also been up in the top 4. So it kind of changes from year to year. Where are they concentrated? Well, we find the vast concentration of English learners in Southern California, in the counties of Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego County, Riverside County, and San Bernardino. Together, all of these 5 counties constitute 53% of English learners in California. The Central Valley, however, also has higher percentages, such as in Tulare, Monterey, Merced, and even in the northern part of our state, like Mendocino and Napa, have high concentrations of English learners. So you will find them dispersed throughout the state. Now, I want to give a shout out to our Native American brothers and sisters out there with respect to language preservation. In 1990, the US passed the Native American Languages Act that it was intended to preserve, protect, and promote Native rights to use and practice their language. And Head Start has also been very instrumental in language preservation. And that is something that is going on across the state. We have been in conversations with them in the past in terms of trying to include them in this discussion of multilingualism and dual language learners. So we can't forget our Native American tribes as well. Next slide. Now, what is going on in California in terms of the policy climate really does play a role in the reason that you're actually getting funding to do these kinds of activities, that the state legislature is paying attention to this, that philanthropy is paying attention to this. Now, many of you know that California, for close to 18 years, was an English-only state. California passed Proposition 227, which basically made California an English-only state and really restricted bilingual education. But in 2016, the voters of California unanimously passed Proposition 58, which is the Learn Initiative, and this allows bilingual programs in public schools. So that was very important, and it sends a message. It was sending a message to the state legislature, was sending a message to the State Department of Education about the interest of the California population on bilingualism, on multilingualism. You also had an initiative by the Superintendent of Public Instruction at the time, Tom Torlakson, called Global California 2030. Now, the Global California 2030 focused on the pre-K through 12 system, and it basically its goal was to have 50% of all K through 12 children or pre-K through 12 children have a bilingual experience in their programs, and also to actually have more professional development for the teachers in those programs. So that's also part of the policy climate. And the last thing that I want to mention is that in 2017, the State Board of Education in California unanimously passed the California English Learner Roadmap, which is a pre-K through 12 vision statement of how to address the needs of English learners in the state of California. And one of the main, I guess, important aspects of that was viewing dual language learners as having assets, as being bilingual, as a strength and not a deficit. Let's go on to the next. So that's the policy climate. And you've got to realize that the policy climate affects the educational policies that go on. So let's go on. All right, so I think Keisha mentioned the issue of brain development and how quickly children learn within the first 5 years. One of the impetus for really paying attention to bilingualism comes from neuroscience. I think many of us in early childhood education always knew that the early years were important. We always knew that the 0 to 5 time frame was when children learned the most, but we didn't really have pictures of it. We didn't have really concrete data until the brain science people started. They were able to look inside children's brains that were learning language. One of the individuals that's been instrumental in this is Dr. Patricia Kuehl at the University of Washington. And I would encourage you, and maybe you will see it in some of your follow-up professional development, her TED Talk where she talks about the geniuses of babies. Now, Dr. Kuehl says that babies are born citizens of the world. What she means by that is that children are capable of learning any language that they hear, that all humans can learn language and they can learn more than one language. Now, how do they do that? Well, every language has its sound system, or what we call phonology, the sounds of the language, the consonant, the vowels that are used in that language. And so the child's brain is hearing all of that. In fact, they hear that before they've been born in utero. So they hear those sounds. And so they're paying attention to those sounds. And as Dr. Kuehl says, they take statistics about that, which sounds am I hearing? But that about the age of 6 months, and if you look at that TED Talk, you'll see that, she shows that in the video, at about the age of 6 months, the babies begin to lose their ability to hear sounds that they don't, to recognize sounds they don't hear. They're only going to pay attention to the sounds that they do hear. So that is how the baby's brain starts to pay attention to the sounds. Let's go on to the next slide. So before we talk more about this, I want to say that all human infants are capable of learning any language to which they are exposed, and all human infants are capable of becoming bilingual if they are exposed to 2 languages from an early age. The ability to speak more than one language, to be bilingual, occurs in 50% of the world's population. This is not an abnormal phenomena. This is normal. This is a normal phenomena that is found all over the world, regardless of your socioeconomic status or your educational level, and in all age groups. So is the bilingual brain different from the monolingual brain? And that's where the neuroscience really came in to play a part. And my answer is, or the answer is, that the bilingual brain is similar in some ways, but different in other ways. Both the monolingual brain and the bilingual brain are dependent upon the quality and quantity of the language that they hear. And you're going to hear me say that over and over within this presentation. The quantity and quality of the language exposure is important for the language development. So it's important to understand how the bilingual brain processes their language stimulation. Although the baby is born with all the brain cells that they will have, it is the neural connections that the brain cell has that helps to discriminate what the babies hear. It is these connections in the baby's brain that are made when they hear certain sounds. These connections play a role in the baby's capacity to develop language. So how is a bilingual brain both similar and different? It is similar in that all infants have the ability to hear and to perceive these sounds, their memory capabilities, their imitative capabilities. These are all universal qualities of babies. They're interested in sounds and they're sensitive to speech sounds. But the bilingual brain is different in that the brain is hearing 2 sets of sounds. And that is creating a lot more activity in the brain, more connectivity in the brain. The neuroscience tells us that the bilingual brains have denser gray and white matter in their nerve cells, and they're especially on the left side of the brain, where language and communication takes place. So at about 4 months, babies can tell, here you see that babies can tell, they pay attention to particular sounds, the rhythms of the sounds. At about 4 months, babies can tell whether a speaker has switched to a different language from just visual cues alone. they will look at how the speaker uses the shape of their mouth to figure out which language the person is talking to them in. So, and you will see that in the video that's coming up. So they watch the shapes and the rhythm of the speaker's mouth and their face. Another aspect of the bilingual brain has to do with how often the baby brain or the bilingual brain has to process information from one language and not pay attention to the other language. So this is very important. What happens with the bilingual brain is when you are bilingual, those of you out there that are bilingual know that you have to translate in your head. You have to inhibit one language in order to pay attention to the other language. And so the bilingual brain has an increased ability to focus. And that is why sometimes you'll see in the literature, they talk about bilingualism as improving cognitive flexibility in children. So let's go on to the next slide. Now, people often will ask about the timing of and learning of a second language. Is there a particular time frame? Is there a particular critical period or a sensitive period for learning a second language? And the answer by Dr. Kuehl, and this graph is from her work that she presents, is yes, there is a particular time when the developing brain is going to be more apt to learn a second language. So on this graph, for instance, you can see on the horizontal axis the capacity to develop a second language. And on the, you can see on the horizontal axis, the capacity, right, the high and low, the capacity to develop a second language. And on the vertical axis, you can see the age at which the child begins to develop their second language. So what you can see there is that between the ages of 0 to 3, that is the best time for the child to learn, at least understand, and it be wired for the sounds of that language. And that over time, by the time a child is about 11 or 12, it really starts to drop off. So that is why learning a second language as an older teen or even as an adult is much more difficult, and particularly with respect to pronunciation. When you're learning, how many of you have tried to learn a foreign language in college or in high school? Maybe you can hear the sounds of that foreign language, but you might have trouble pronouncing them compared to a child who was exposed to those sounds from birth. When you're learning a second language as an adult, you probably will have an accent because your brain has not been wired for the sounds or the connections. So let me give you an example of that. When my husband first started working, he was working with a lot of clients from Japan. And he would ask me to go to accompany him to business dinners and social events with his Japanese clients. And you have to understand that my name has an R in it. It's Marlene R. And what I found was that the Japanese clients could not pronounce my name because I came to understand that the sound R and the sound L does not exist in Japanese. So they could not hear the R. So they would say Marlene. They would skip the R sound. This is common, and this is going to happen to us. It happens to me when I try to pronounce people's names in languages that I have not been exposed to. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the developmental milestones that are similar and different in bilinguals. Now, again, one of the messages I hope you're picking up on is that we're looking at child growth and development from both a universal lens, things that are similar for all children, but then what are things that are different because they are bilingual. So on this graph, you can see developmental milestones or approximate timeframes for the emergence of speech. On this graph, you can see that babbling, when children are going ah, eh, ooh, ooh, and in the first 6 to 10 months, happens for all children. But on the graph And the production of first words also happens pretty much between 10 and 14 months for all children. But for bilingual children, because they are hearing two languages simultaneously, when they begin to verbalize, they will use sounds and vocabulary words from either language that they hear. You must remember that infants are not thinking, oh, I'm speaking this language, or no, I'm now speaking this other language. That's not how the infant brain is working or the baby brain is working. What the babies are thinking is, how am I going to communicate my needs? What do I need to do to communicate my needs? So for example, you will see that by 24 months, most infants will use about 50 words, but not always in the same language. And when they begin to use two-word combinations, they will mix words from both languages. So they might say, mi vaso. Instead of saying my vaso, they will mix Spanish and English and say mi vaso. What's important to understand here when we're talking about what's similar and what's different here is that children growing up bilingually attain the developmental milestones at the same ages as children growing up monolingually. However, bilingual children have vocabulary distributed across both languages. So they typically will know some words in one language and some words in another language. So if you only look at one language, i.e. English, if you're only looking at them in terms of how much English they know, they will look like they are quote unquote behind. But if you combine the number of vocabulary words in their first language or their home language with English, you will find that they will be the same as monolingual English speaking children. So what is the implication of this? For many of us in the DLL world, we've been really talking about the importance of assessment in the home language. If we really want to know what a child knows in its totality, in terms of what they can comprehend, we need to assess them in both languages. And I know this is a challenge and it will be a continuing challenge as we go forward, but we must recognize that the child brings their home language and that is part of their knowledge base. So let's look at a video that talks about some of these points that I have just been discussing with you. So let's go ahead and roll that video. Okay, I just want to reiterate on the video that you saw that it talked about increased brain connectivity and that the flexibility that comes with bilingualism, with that increased brain activity. And you saw how the bilingual babies are more aware of gestures and facial features. So I just want to reiterate that. So let's move on to the idea about how long it takes to learn a second language. This is a question that I'm often asked. How long will it take? And I'm particularly asked this question by parents. So when I'm asked this question, I often respond with, well, how long does it take a monolingual English speaking child to learn how to speak English? How long does it take them to read and write in English? I think it's very important that we as early educators help to inform parents and even ourselves that language is not an overnight process. It takes years to develop even your first language, let alone develop bilingually. So, we need to be cognizant of that and not think that if we only have exposure for 1 year, that's going to suffice. So on this chart, you see a pyramid graph from the work of Lisa Lopez and Mariela Paez, whose book I feature in another slide, and it's on the resource list that you will receive at the end of this presentation. But so from what you see on this slide is a graph that's called, from the book called Teaching Language Learners. Now, what you see on the slide is that it will typically take 3 to 5 years to build social language. And on the right-hand side, you see that it takes 5 to 7 years to build what we call academic language. What's the difference? Social language is a language that we use in everyday conversation. Hello, how are you? How's it going? That kind of thing. Whereas academic language, on the other hand, is language that we generally do not use in everyday conversation, but it is language that's used in textbooks, educational materials, instructional materials. Academic language is the language of school, and it's needed in order for children to learn by reading. Now, finally, what you will see on this slide at the bottom right-hand corner is that Lisa and Mariela point out again, and this will be reiterated throughout this presentation, that a strong foundation in one language can help in the development of the second language. And I'm going to give you an example of that. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, before I give you the example, let's talk about the categories of bilingualism. Now, before we get into how a child's first language relates to the development of a second language, let's discuss 2 different types of bilingual development and one outcome of bilingual development. The first way children can become bilingual is through simultaneous bilingualism, or they're exposed to 2 languages simultaneously. And so this could be where one parent speaks one language, another parent speaks another language, or the grandparents speak a language that the child is exposed to on a regular basis, and the parents speak English. It could also be, and this is not uncommon, where the parents are speaking a non-English language in the home, but the child or the baby has school-age children, brothers and sisters, who come in and speak English to them. So they're hearing English from their older siblings. The second type of bilingual development is called successive or sequential bilingualism. And this is when a child is exposed to one language first prior to entering into an early learning setting of some type before they're exposed to English. So one starts before the other. I think that English permeates our home environments to a larger degree than we think. I think that young children are hearing English through media, through video, through streaming, and that can influence their exposure to English even when the home language is not English. Now, the last type, the receptive bilingual, is really more of an outcome of possibly simultaneous or successive sequential processes of becoming bilingual. And that is when a child has age-appropriate level proficiency in one language, but can only understand in the other language. In other words, the child can understand the other language in terms of their comprehension, but not in terms of their production. So let me give you an example of that, and that's me. I am, for the most part, I consider myself a receptive bilingual. I was brought up by a mother who only spoke Spanish to me, but I had older siblings that spoke English. And by the time I came around, because I was the youngest, my mother knew English, she understood English. So the way that my mother and I communicated with each other is that she spoke Spanish to me, I spoke English to her, and we seemed to get along and we understood each other. That's receptive bilingualism. So when the time came for me to produce language, it became more difficult for me to produce a language. I could understand everything that was being said to me, but when I was asked to produce the language, because I didn't have the practice with pronunciation, it became a more difficult task, and I had to really go back to school and study, which I have done. So next slide. And before I say that, you know, this issue that I'm going through, or I went through, is not uncommon, and you see that with a lot of children in California. Okay, so I'm going to bring in theory here. There is a theory in linguistics and in language development that relates to how the first language influences the second language. And this is important for our pedagogy. It has implications for our pedagogical practice. And that theoretical frame is called an interdependence hypothesis. Remember the graph with the triangle where Lopez and Paez said that a strong first language forms the basis for the development of a second language? Well, that is the idea here. The interdependence hypothesis basically says that when a child has a strong foundation in their first language, they will learn a second language much more effectively. There is research to support that. Some of the earlier speakers alluded to this. There's a research synthesis by the National Academy of Sciences and Engineering that found strong support for the idea that the strength of the child's first language relates to how well they're going to acquire English. Now, for me, the way that I like to think about this issue, which I frankly don't think is talked about that much in our work, is through the idea of concept development. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, in preschool and in 0 to 5 environments, what do we focus on as practitioners? We focus on concept development. We focus on what? Numbers, shapes, colors, letters of the alphabet, same, different. We focus, we're trying to get children to understand those concepts, right? And so let me give you an example of what this means in practice. So let's go to the next slide. I actually have talked with parents about this. The issue of the interdependence in concept development. When a child understands a concept or idea in their home language, that concept or idea does not change when they are learning a second language. The concept is stable. The concept, for the most part, there might be a few exceptions to this, but the concept remains the same. So here you have an example of a red circle. And the child understands, hopefully in their home language, they've been taught this is a circle, it is the color red. And here you see in this example, labels in Spanish, Arabic, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. What is important to understand is that the concept doesn't change. What changes is the label. What changes is what we call it. What are the words associated with the concept? That is what's changing. The concept doesn't change. And for me, this idea is very important when stressing to parents who do not speak English to speak to their child in their home language, to help them develop their concepts and their ideas. These concepts and ideas will eventually transfer over into English when they are learning the new words that go with it. But if the child does not have that concept in their home language, then we as practitioners, when they come to us, we have to teach them both the concept and the label or the word associated with it and what it signifies in English. So this relates to the interdependence hypothesis on the previous slide, that a strong foundation in your first language, in this particular case, concept development, will help the child more easily acquire the word in their second language. Okay, next slide. You know, one of the characteristics of bilingualism is what we call code switching or language mixing, and there's a new term that's coming up called translanguaging. This is when we combine both languages. So the Spanish-speaking child who's learning English might say, I want café, I want coffee, or mopeando, where they take the word mop and they put the present participle after it, the ing part, but only from Spanish. So they're picking that up from the grammar in Spanish. When this occurs, people think that children are confused about which language to speak. But that is completely further from the truth. I see the combination of languages or mixing languages or parts of speech as signs of intelligence or ingenuity on the part of the child. When a child cannot retrieve the word they need in one language, they will borrow it from the language that they do know, or the other language. They think of the word in the other language. When one analyzes code switching or language mixing, you will find logical grammatical patterns to it. So for example, in the picture above, you see the little girl understands the noun letra comes from the adjective, comes after the adjective my. In English, the grammatical order is the adjective noun. You put the adjective before the noun. In Spanish, it's the other way around. You put the adjective after the noun. So a Spanish-speaking child learning English who is trying to say red car may instead say car red, because they're using their grammatical knowledge from their first language. Now, the last term, translanguaging, I just want to bring this up because this is coming up in the literature and people are talking about it in terms of this code switching and language mixing. And this is coming from work with older children. The idea in translanguaging is that bilingual children use all aspects of both languages in understanding their world. The idea that it tries to do away with this idea that one language is stronger and one language is weaker. We used to talk about dominance, language dominance in the old days. And it's trying to do away with that. It's basically saying that whatever languages a child knows and produces, it's all part of one unitary meaning system. So I just want to bring that to your attention because this idea is starting to come up in the literature base. Next slide. So what are the benefits of bilingualism? And this is what is capturing a lot of national attention, frankly. The benefits of bilingualism has been showcased in the New York Times, on National Public Radio, in media. Dr. Kuhl's work has been highly quoted in a lot of media. And I think a lot of parents of monolingual English speakers are recognizing the value of bilingualism for all kinds of reasons. And that's why they voted for Proposition 58. So what are some of the benefits? I already talked to you about the brain activity being more active and that the child can focus attention more selectively when they are bilingual because they have to suppress one language in order to express the other language or to pay attention to the other language. So they have more cognitive flexibility. That's not to say that they're necessarily smarter than monolingual children, but according to research, bilingual children are better at controlling their attention. And sometimes I think, and this is just Marlene Zepeda hypothesizing here, that bilingual children are better at regulation, at self-regulation. That's my hypothesis because of this brain flexibility. So the idea, one of a very important benefits of bilingualism is the strengthened sense of identity, ethnic identity. Being bilingual often means you are bicultural, which is associated with a more positive self-image. Research with teens, most of this research, and we're going to get into it with identity, has really come from older children that find that bilingualism is related to better mental health and academic outcomes. When it's communicated to the child that their primary language or their home language is important and the value of speaking that language is viewed as an asset, it confers a sense of pride in who they are as people. Bilingualism also helps in widening our perspectives of cultural differences. The bilingual individual are often, as I said, bicultural individuals. and they have to compare and contrast the two different cultures that they are experiencing. Bilingual individuals, or let me say bicultural individuals, understand different cultures, have different ways of looking at the world and different priorities. And in turn, because of that, compare and contrast, they have a heightened sense of awareness of cultural differences and hopefully an appreciation of differences. One of the benefits of bilingualism that has gotten more attention, and I think that's why a lot of monolingual English parents want their children to be bilingual, is improved economic opportunities. When I was a preschool teacher in the year of the dinosaur, I used to show my parents the want ads. Some of you are probably too young to remember, but we used to have want ads in newspapers. And I would show them the want ads where it said bilingual preferred or bilingual desired, to show them that there were job opportunities available for people that could speak two languages. In the work of Callahan and Gandara, in a book called The Bilingual Advantage, a set of studies focused on the economic consequences of bilingualism. This research demonstrated that academic achievement, college aspirations, and employment potential are enhanced for bilingual individuals, but they're particularly beneficial for children that are biliterate. That is, that they can read and write in their second language. And then finally, for those of a certain age demographic, there are neuroplastic benefits associated with bilingualism as you get older. Research from Canada shows that as we get older, language consumes more of our day. It takes up more of our time as other perceptual capacities might diminish. It activates regions of the brain, the entire brain. And so in aging, bilingualism, they have found that bilingualism delays cognitive impairment because a bilingual individual has more cognitive reserve. So it helps with those of us who, so maybe I'll be less cognitively impaired as I get older. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. So, you know, one of the things that I have often said when we're talking about this topic of dual language learning and multilingualism is we're not just talking about the words and the grammar. Bilingualism and multilingualism has psychological components to it. There are socio-emotional implications for being bilingual and multilingual, or socio-emotional implications between your language, your home language, and your culture. So for example, you know, when I present to groups, often it's not unusual that someone in the group will give you a story about how their home language was not valued. I have seen people crying sometimes talking about this. So this is an important aspect of language development for these children. A person has a socio-emotional connection to their language. In Spanish, we talk about la lengua materna, or the maternal language. It connotes a connection to your family, your feelings of security, the safety, and the way you feel about your community. So here you have a quotation from Noam Chomsky, who's one of our leading linguists in the United States. And Chomsky talked about how all humans are wired for language, that we all are genetically programmed to learn how to speak and to use language. But he also says, what I've been saying is that it's not just about words, it's about culture, it's about a tradition, it's about the unification of a community, it's about a whole history that creates that community. That is embodied in language. So when we think about our dual language learners, I really urge you to think about them as dual cultural learners too. It's not just about the language, it's also about the culture. And also recognize that the two cultural values and priorities that the children are experiencing may be in conflict with each other. There may be areas where one culture emphasizes one thing and the other culture represents something quite different. Next slide. So what is culture? Let's start with that definition. Let's talk about it for a moment. There's different definitions of culture. Generally, we think about culture as the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people. When I would talk about this with audiences and with students, I would always say, you know, we really have to think about culture in two ways. What are the external expressions of that culture? What are the external aspects of it? And what are the internal aspects? What are the things you cannot see about culture? So on this slide, you see an iceberg, and notice that most of the iceberg is floating underneath the water. On top, you can see the external elements of culture, such as dress, the types of food they eat, the languages they speak. These are the outward expressions of culture, and we want to see that. We want to see that in the early learning environments. That's not what, I'm not saying that we shouldn't see that. However, the majority of the iceberg sits below the water, and this contains the things that you cannot see. It's invisible to the eye, but because it consists of the internal elements of culture, and that includes the values and beliefs, the customs, the philosophy of life, the meaning of life that culture might have. And so these external manifestations of culture, like holidays and ways of dressing and food, are important. And they're important aspects of one cultural heritage, but those of us working with young children and their families, especially for cultures that we are not familiar with, we must delve deeper into the understanding the more invisible elements of that culture. It's the invisible elements of culture that provide the framework for child rearing, for the experiences that the child will have interacting with the adults and their family and their community. Let's go to the next slide. So now I'm going to take you through this notion of socialization, that language socialization transmits the cultural values and beliefs. So it is through language that children learn about their culture. They learn about it through the process of socialization, which refers to teaching and learning that goes on between the developing child and their family and the wider society. The family is where it begins. It goes on to include early learning and education settings. Later, it includes the peer group, and it also includes the media to which they are exposed, like TV programs and the radio and video streamings, etc. Through interactions with grown-ups and older children, young children learn how to do many things, like health skills, what not to do, and ideas about how the world works. What is important to understand is that language is the communication tool used in interaction with children, and it is through language that cultural values are transmitted. And I'm going to give you an example of that, I think, in some subsequent slide. So language transmits culture, but a culture also socializes children on how to use language. So there's socialization to use language. And what do I mean by that? By that, I mean that different cultures are letting children know, how do you talk to someone? How close do you get to a person when you speak to them? Do you have eye contact with that individual? So that is the pragmatics of what we call socialization to use language. Now so children acquire unspoken knowledge of principles of social order and systems of belief through their interactions where language is used. So let me give you an example of that. When I was a preschool, and it might resonate with some of you. When I was a preschool teacher, I was working primarily with Spanish-speaking populations. And when the parents would drop off their children, they would say to that child, "Pórtate bien, compórtate bien, behave yourself." And when they would pick up the child, they would look at the child and say, "Te portaste bien? Did you behave yourself?" And I'd be there as a preschool teacher thinking, how come they're not asking them about their activities and the fun things we did in class today? You know, why are they focused on good behavior? But it's important to understand that this phrase is part of a larger value within Latinx culture of being bien educado. The idea is for the child to follow certain social rules, including listening to adults, being polite, and being different. Because families from Latinx heritage stress the importance of cooperation and getting along with the group as an important value, the phrase "pórtate bien" embodies the value. Now, in addition to the language, okay, we said that already, I'm sorry. And I want to just mention that there is I was going to have a URL here with a video, and it's going to be in your resource list of the work of Barbara Rogoff, where she compares mother-child interaction between a US mother and a mother in Guatemala. Barbara's done a lot of work in Guatemala, where it shows you the real differences in the way that parents interact with their child in terms of language stimulation. Okay, next slide. So now, you know, I've been talking about how language is also a very socio-emotional experience for us. And one of the consequences of being bilingual is the possibility and/or the probability of losing your home language. When DLLs and ELs lose their home language and become unable to communicate with their family members and members of their community, there may be quite a bit of psychological trauma associated with that, and ruptures in the family relationships. Now, much of what we know about language loss comes from older children. The loss of the native language among first and second generation teenagers, for example, may affect their ability to communicate with their family members and negatively affect family relationships. We know that children of immigrants are more likely to adapt more quickly to US culture than their immigrant parents. This in turn creates a cultural gap that has implications for shared understanding between a parent and a child. What I've always said, that the teen years are always difficult years anyway, where the child is trying to separate themselves from their family. But for a dual language learner or an English learner, where language may become a barrier, the gap can even be greater. For Asian populations, as for other cultural groups, respect for parents is particularly important. It comes from the Chinese Confucian philosophy that stresses respect for the family, marked by obedience and respect for elders. In a study of Chinese and Korean children of immigrant teenagers, researchers found that when children lost their home language, they stopped using the honorific titles when addressing adults. In Asian languages, Korean and Chinese, there's a lot of honorifics that are associated with elders. They use auntie and uncle for family friends and things of that nature. And these researchers, and this research actually was done in the San Diego area, when these researchers looked at the responses of the teens, they found a direct correlation between the ability to speak the home language and how much respect that child had for their parents. So what I want to do is show you next a video of a UC undergraduate, and this was taken a number of years ago, where she talks about her experience losing her language. And it comes from the work of Lily Wan Fillmore, who really, from UC Berkeley, who really advocated about the importance of a home language, and the idea that if a child loses their language, they're losing more than a language. So the chat box is open, so you can put your responses, if you would like, in the chat box regarding the video that you're going to see. If you feel like doing that, you don't have to do that, but we thought it would be a good idea to do that. So let's go ahead and hear about Linda and the story of language loss.
My family left Vietnam in 1975 during the peak of the Vietnam War. I had entered preschool. I didn't know any English. I only spoke Vietnamese at home with my parents. I slowly got used to speaking English, especially since I didn't have any Vietnamese friends in my classes. I knew English was very important at that time. Not only because my teachers pushed English so hard, but because it tied into being an American, which was placed very high in importance. In 4th grade, I transferred schools, and that was when things started to get really rocky. I was made fun of, not from people who disliked me, but actually from friends. That was when I really started to dislike speaking in Vietnamese. I hardly talked to my parents when I was growing up because they would want me to speak in Vietnamese and I just couldn't, and so we just stopped talking. Today, I haven't talked to my grandparents in almost a year. I see them like at holidays, and of course, like I hug my grandmother hello, and I bow hello, which is jiao ba. And that's the extent to it. For instance, recently my grandfather was in the hospital and I still haven't visited him. And I wouldn't know what to say to him because I can't find the words to express myself to him. And that's pretty much the way I feel with my parents most of the time too. I just don't have the words to express myself with them. When I was a kid, it was like I hugged them all the time. I kissed them goodbye. And now it's like, I don't know, I can't explain it. Now it's like they're my parents, but like I haven't said I love you since, I don't know, since I was 8 or 9. That I just wish that I knew Vietnamese so that I could talk to them more and relate to them more.
Okay, I think we're going to open it up for some questions. Jackie, are you going to moderate that?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Zepeda, and thank you for that whole section on the brain research and really starting that conversation around the connection between the identity, the culture, and language and identity. I think those are huge pieces that need to be discussed and addressed in more detail. So thank you so much for starting that conversation. But yes, before we take a 5-minute stretch break, because we'll need like a screen break. And then, but before that, we'll entertain a couple of questions. And then if we don't get to all of the questions in the Q&A box during this 5-minute segment, we can come back to it at the end, and then we'll have some more time to do Q&A. So the first question says, would K-12 assist and collaborate with ECE to promote language diversity? Because as of today, some families continue to be afraid of the ESL or EL status.
Well, again, this is to Sandra. Sandra, this is, it's changing. Remember I said we've been an English-only environment in California for so long, and we just started to move into really valuing multilingualism and bilingualism and trying to ramp up in this area once again. The EL roadmap is in the education code. So, and there are advocacy organizations that are really working to try to get the word out. So not only do we need a campaign for parents, we also are trying to educate our fellow colleagues about the importance of bilingualism and multiculturalism. But I totally get where you're coming from. Many of our parents have been stigmatized, or they feel like their children have been burned through what they call the long-term English learners category, that's been a negative, and they don't want to see that. And so they are still very confused. It's not that they're confused, it's that they want to protect their child. And so one of the initiatives here from the QSLA is a parent education campaign. And we're also we're also working to reach out to K through 12. So it's going to take a while.
Okay, Dr. Zepeda, the next question, at 24 months, is there some sort of confusion? So much so that sometimes toddlers may hold back on their expressive language?
In terms of the baby comprehension, remember I said that, very young babies, they're not that conscious. You have to think about what their cognitive level is at that age. They've just gone through their word spurt at 18 months. And so they're using whatever language that comes to their head, whatever words come to their head in order to express themselves. So I don't think the babies are confused, frankly. I think it's what we think is going on in their heads. I think if we accept what they're producing, whatever they're producing, as a legitimate form of communication, and then depending on whether we're bilingual or we only speak English to them, we respond in a positive way to that child. What we're first doing is validating their communication to us, that they're important and what they're saying is important. I'm not sure that they're necessarily confused.
Okay, Dr. Zepeda, we're going to take one more question, and this one is directed at your personal experience that you shared. Was your receptive bilingualism experience based on conscious choice? Is there a conscious choice in the child when responding in English than in their home language? And then she's referencing that my cousins who grew up in the Philippines and came to the US at 10 years old never responded in Tagalog, even if they understood it.
Right. In my case, I was not conscious that this was going on. And the reason I know I was not conscious of it is because I didn't recognize that my mother spoke such poor English. Because in my community in East LA, where I grew up, everybody's parents spoke Spanish and all the children spoke English. So it was very normative. And so for me, and so that I wasn't aware of it until I saw my mother outside of that community having to speak English. And I went, oh my goodness, I didn't realize she couldn't produce English that well. So it was not conscious for me. It was just the way we did it. However, and I think I have it in one of my slides, motivation for or losing your second language is that there are cases where children will consciously make an effort to speak English over their home language. And I saw that when I was a teacher. I've seen that working with parents. So there can be a consciousness associated with it where the child says, no, I don't want to speak that. It's too hard. It's not what's important. It's not what I value. And the child does make a personal choice.
Very good. So thank you, Dr. Zepeda. That was just about 5 minutes of Q&A. We'll take a 5-minute break from the screen, and then we'll continue with part 2. And then at the end, we'll come back to more Q&A. Okay, hopefully everybody was able to get at least a little stretch, some fresh air, refueled, perhaps, or just simply took a break away from the screen, because we know it's hard to sit in front of the computer for such an extended time. But thank you for all of you for sticking around and still being part of the session. And we'll continue on with part 2. Dr. Zepeda, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just to let you know, I have been answering some things in the Q&A box to the extent that I have in my 5-minute break. So.
Awesome.
You got some answers. Okay, so let's turn to another psychological component that is associated with language development. And I'm speaking about identity. Now, generally, when we speak about identity, we think about it as how people see themselves, how they view themselves in relationship to how other people see them. But when we think about ethnic identity in particular, we think about how it refers to how the child sees themselves as a member of a group, a community, a particular ethno-linguistic group in the case of dual language learners. Well, again, just like with the language loss research, the majority of what we know about ethnic identity really comes from research with older children. And as I mentioned earlier, a positive ethnic identity in adolescence has been linked to higher self-esteem, better mental health, and better academic outcomes. And so the roots of ethnic identity probably are likely to start at birth and occurs through the interactions of socialization that we've been talking about with family members. Ethnic linguistic identity is developed through the language interactions that the children have with their family members, again, through this language socialization of the transmission of the values and beliefs. And how is that done? It's done through oral traditions. Some cultures are more oral than looking at written material. They have stories, they have poems, they have little songs. I don't know how many of you, my mother taught me a bunch of things when I was little in Spanish, songs and poems and things like that. Literary forms, music theory, music history and the history of the culture are conveyed through the primary language. Now we know that children as young as age 3 are aware that they may be different from other ethnic and racial groups. We tend to have more research on preschool children in relationship to skin color. But in terms of ethnic identity, the child is still trying to figure that out. And so we don't have, it's harder to research that, but clearly the messages that a child receives from those around them will influence their sense of ethnic identity over time. Next slide. So in relationship to ethnic identity, again, as I mentioned, it's through those interactions with other people, the child develops their sense of self through their language and their interaction, and they come to see themselves as they are reflected in other people. And this is called the looking glass self. So if you are told that you are tall, if you are smart, if you are thin, if you are not so thin, you incorporate those ideas into your self-image. For young DLLs, understanding and using the primary language will enable them to access important information about their culture, which may in turn be linked to their developing sense of self and their socio-emotional functioning. I'm not going to go into say this, but I was having a discussion the other day about nicknames and how different, at least in my culture, there are a lot of nicknames that are given to children. A lot of them tend to not be positive. And so, but that is the nickname that's given. Like, let me give you an example. Flaco is for a skinny kid. And that the child incorporates that, and often that nickname follows them even into adulthood. But it becomes part of the person's personal narrative. In early childhood, we often do activities with children about themselves. We ask them to draw pictures of themselves, trace their bodies on butcher paper, take pictures of them and post them everywhere. But there are cultural differences in how we are taught to see ourselves. Let me give you an example from the work that I did with colleagues coming out of the UCLA Bridging Cultures project. Next slide. Okay, here is a vignette with a teacher in preschool. I'm going to read it to you and then we can react to it. This is called All About Me. Each child in the preschool group is making a book called All About Me. The teacher asks each child to say what is special about himself or herself. The teacher writes the comment down and the child draws a picture to go along with the words. One boy responds to the question with examples about other people. His brother is very good at soccer. His father is very good at cooking. The teacher keeps asking the child to describe qualities about himself, prompting him. This is about you. Are you smart? Yes, of course you're smart. So let's say that you are special because you are smart. In the end, the boy's book contains drawings with dictated sentences such as, I am special because I am strong. I am special because I'm smart. I am special because I'm handsome. When Luis's mother, the mother of the little boy, sees the book, she looks distressed instead of delighted the way the teacher thought she should. So I want you to think about why Luis's mother is not happy. What is it about the book that Luis made that does not sit well with the mother? Well, it's highly likely, and if we had a time, we would have some discussion about this. It's highly likely that in the mother's culture, a focus on individualism is not necessarily celebrated. Because she comes from a family where their culture focuses on cooperation and collaboration, she is having trouble with this focus on individualism. So although Luis tried to make a connection to his family members by mentioning his brother and his father, the teacher did not realize that an exclusive focus on the individual was not consistent with how Luis was brought up. So I imagine that this idea of individualism and interdependence in focus on the family is very characteristic of many cultures, not just of the Latinx culture. So next slide. So let me end this section by talking about ethnic identity is a twin to linguistic identity. Acquiring a language is the act of becoming a person and a member of a particular society. You cannot really untangle culture from how it is embedded and expressed in the language of different cultures. If we are to understand the development of DLLs and ELs, we must become familiar with the child and the child's culture. We have to learn to appreciate what are the differences and similarities between our own ideas and how using the child's home language strengthens that connection to their families, validates who they are as a person. So I'm going to end this particular discussion of ethnic identity as I started this whole section on language and culture. That language is not just about learning about vocabulary and grammar. It is about the development of the whole person. Okay, so now we're going to move on to families, correct, Jackie? I think so.
That is correct.
Okay, so now let's turn the page and talk about our third topic, which is families and family engagement and family partnerships. You know, in early childhood, we have always considered working with and engaging with and partnering with parents as essential. And the way that I've always thought about this is that we are working with very young children, and to a large extent, we are substitute parents for that child, particularly when that child is with us for long periods of the day. So we have to really think about our influence. We really have to think in a sense of co-parenting, right, with the family. So in this slide, you see pictures of a family that includes grandparents, aunts and uncles, siblings. When we're talking about families, we're talking not just about the mother and family, but all of the family, all parts of the family that come into contact with this child. Those of you that work in the field know that sometimes it's the grandma that's picking up the child. It can be the aunt that is picking up the child, the uncle, etc. So one of the things that is shifting, I think, in the way that we think about dual language learners is this focus on that it is an asset and strength. Well, we also need to think about that in terms of families, that families possess strengths and assets that we should be aware of. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and I believe in the next slide. You know, your families are your key informants about the child. They can tell you about any kinds of medical conditions that the child has, but more so they can tell you about the child's interests, what the child is doing, what their child's favorite toy is. So it's important to really have the lines of communication open with your families to talk about the child. And you know, a lot of parents like to talk a lot about their child. Parents live vicariously through their children. They project quite a bit on their child. So we as educators, we can get a lot of information, but when you do not share the language and culture of that family, this issue of communication becomes even more important. Because you don't speak the language and culture or know the culture of the family, you have to figure out, well, how can I get information about this family or this culture? If you need to get interpreters and translators to help you, we have to figure out how to do that, because this issue of interpretation and translation is coming up more and more in this world of dual language learners and multilingual learners as well. So we know not all DLL children are children of immigrants, but many are. And those children of immigrants often live in under-resourced neighborhoods and communities. They can live in crowded housing conditions. They can live in places where there's no green space, where they're living by very busy streets. They don't have any backyards, etc. So one of the things that we need to do as educators is really kind of get a sense of what the community looks like, what are the resources in the community, what is the context in which families reside, so that we can get a better understanding of the day-to-day realities of our children and families. I don't think that this is so much an issue with family childcare providers, because often they live in that same community as the families that they're providing service to, but many of us do not live in the communities in which we work. And so it's really important that we get information about that community. You know, and finally, I want to say that it's our responsibility as educators to establish communication between the caregiving setting and the home. It's not the family's responsibility necessarily, although some families will initiate that contact. When you're coming from an immigrant family that sees teachers and schools as people in authority, people to be held in high, to have a lot of respect for and to be very deferent to. And if they don't speak the language, then they may be very reticent to reach out to you. And so the issue then is we need to reach out to them. We got to figure out how we can do that. So let's look at the next slide. Okay, this is a map of East Los Angeles area. I grew up in East Los Angeles. And again, just to reiterate, we really need to figure out what are the day-to-day realities of the children? What are they experiencing? That will help us understand our families. What does the physical environment look like? What are the resources available in that community? Is there neighborhood cohesion? You'd be surprised how often parents feel isolated in their own communities. They may be living in housing projects where they don't know the people next door to them. That is not unusual. People think, particularly with Latinx culture, that everybody knows everybody and everybody reaches out to everybody, and we have these extended families. That's not necessarily the case. And so often, for example, churches become a very good source of community cohesion. And I have often worked sometimes with churches as well. So we need to think about the actual places and spaces that families and children live. So let's go to the next slide. Now, when I talk about parenting and parent development and parents' ideas about child growth and development, one of the things that we have to think about is what is universal about parenting goals for children and what is culturally specific. There are universal goals that parents have for all children, regardless of what language and culture they come from, regardless of where they might live in the world. Most parents, the majority of parents, want health and safety as their basic fundamental priority for the child. They want the child to be in good health. They want good shelter for their child. They want food for their child. These are basic needs, and these are basic goals that families try to provide for their children. The second universal goal that all families have, regardless of their language and culture, is figuring out how this child is going to economically sustain themselves when they are grown up. And that could mean formal schooling. So that's why education becomes very important, because parents will say, we want you to get a good education, because that means, quote unquote, you're going to get a good job, right? And that'll give you more job opportunities. Or we want you to have a trade or a skill, kind of depending on the family. But that is a universal goal that all families have. However, when it comes to beliefs about child growth and development, there may be certain distinctions that can be made. In the realm of language development, for example, I have noticed that in US culture, we look at the period of infancy as a time to razz up the baby, jazz up the baby, put the mobile over their faces, have all kinds of toys and things in front of them. So this whole notion of a lot of cognitive stimulation for the baby is what's promoted in our culture. You see that. My nieces and nephews, oh my God, I have pictures. It's incredible, all the stuff that these kids have. But that's not true in all cultures in terms of all this cognitive stimulation. Other cultures value quietness, quietude, calm environments is very much valued. When I used to make home visits with parents, when I was studying this issue with newborns and with infants, I would go into homes, and these were Spanish-speaking homes, where all the windows were closed, all the doors were shut, the heater was up high. They swaddled their babies like tamales, wrapped them up, because that they wanted to protect that child. They wanted the health and safety of that child, and that was not unusual. Some cultures, in terms of language development, don't necessarily see their role in developing language in young children. They see that that's the responsibility of schools, or that's the responsibility of other people in the formal school setting. And so they don't necessarily see that as their role. And this notion of parent as teacher, which predominates in our field, may be incongruent with some parents. That's not important. It's not that you cannot convey that to parents and teach parents what they can do with children, but they may not be coming from that frame of reference in terms of their own cultural backgrounds. Now, finally, there are traditions and rituals that are associated in child development. With Latinx, we often think of the quinceañera I think that's at age 15, that many people may know about, but there are other traditions and rituals of cultures that you may not know about. And the culture and ritual that I want to highlight here is from my colleague, Jung-hee Do from the Advancement Project, who just had a baby about 6 months ago. And this is what you see in the picture is Jung-hee and her son, Lucas, who is celebrating what they call, and any of you who speak Korean, forgive me, but it's called the Bakil, or the 100-day of life celebration. And this is in Korean culture. And this tradition comes from Korea when, after World War II, when they were very economically depressed, there was a lot of food shortages, and there was a very high infant mortality rate in Korea. And so this tradition evolved to celebrate the fact that a child was surviving 100 days. And so this celebration grew, and we here in LA have the largest Korean American population outside of Korea. And so it is celebrated here. And what you see in the front are rice cakes, and in the back there's a rice cake, and it symbolizes long life and the fact that the baby has survived. So I wanted to give a shout out to my colleague who educated me about this. Next slide. Okay, we talked about the strengths of the families. Now I want to turn to the concept of funds of knowledge. Some of you may be familiar with this. Over the years, one of the areas of concern in early childhood education has been what we call continuity and discontinuity between the home and the school. This was the idea that the more that teaching and learning experiences the child had in the home that resembled what went on in school or matched what went on in school, the more successful the child would be. And this is what I learned in graduate school. This was what was promoted. But the problem with this approach was that this perspective really disadvantaged families whose home culture did not necessarily match the expectations that the school had for children. So in response, one of the responses to that particular way of conceptualizing the relationship between home and families is this concept of funds of knowledge. This concept presumes that every household and community setting is an educational setting. It is within those educational settings that important knowledge is passed on from one generation to another. And with the funds of knowledge approach, the idea is that caregivers and early educators can learn about a family's tradition. I just mentioned the 100-day celebration earlier with Korean Americans, family occupations, work experience, what special talents and hobbies a family may possess, that that information can be brought into the classroom. Learning about the family's culture and learning about these talents and strengths that families possess will help not only the early the early educator learn about the family's culture, but you can bring that in, you can bring that knowledge into the classroom. So let me give you an example. I was observing in a Head Start classroom a number of years ago with some work I was doing, and the teacher had asked a parent to come in. Now, this was a dad who changed the horseshoes on horses, and he came in with his cowboy hat and his kind of jeans and his cowboy attire, and he brought all his equipment, or some of the equipment that he used to change the horseshoes on the hoofs of the horses. And so he brought that in and he demonstrated to the child how he did that. And my assumption was that the teacher provided some information about that. The pride that his son showed when his father was explaining to the children what he did for a living and how important that was, really brought home this idea of connecting the strength of the family, the talents, the expertise of the family into the curriculum in the school setting. And so there's many examples of that where parents can come in and do cooking activities or show a special, maybe they know how to weave or sing a song or what have you in their home language. This is an example that parents have assets, they have strengths. Let's figure out how we can utilize that, how we can capitalize on that to bring that homeschool connection, to make it stronger and more alive in the classroom. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, how can we learn about families and their children? We often do intake interviews and enrollment, and different programs have different amounts of information that they collect from parents. This is an example of a family interview that was developed by my colleague, Linda Espinosa, and you'll find this in the Toolkit for Implementing Language Learning Project. Will be shared at the end of this session. And this particular interview talks about languages spoken. And I want you to note that with languages spoken, they're asking not only what the parents speak, but what other kinds of language input is a child getting? Because remember, we talked about the different categories of bilingualism. Children are being exposed to English more than we think they are. It asks about the interests of the child, the family activities, what are the priorities for their children, and then what are the special talents. So this is one way to get information, and it's suggested that it's done right at the beginning of a program. Now, the identification of dual language learners has been an area of concern for many of us because we didn't know for a long time who the dual language learners were, where they were located. Do we have a system for identifying dual language learners? And it's a very mixed bag out there in the world. And so there is actual legislation that was passed recently, and I don't know if it was signed by the governor, where all publicly subsidized pre-K programs, state pre-K programs, will have to identify their dual language learners and the languages that they speak. They hadn't had to do that before necessarily. So this is a big deal. So it's important that we find out if the children speak if another language other than English is being spoken in the home. This is one example of a way to do it. Next slide. Now, one of the things about working with families is really developing an environment where they feel welcome. It's being called a culture of belonging. How many of you have walked into a school setting or an early learning setting typically it's a support staff where they're smiling at you, they're friendly, they're welcoming. There's really interesting things to see on the bulletin boards, or you've walked into that front office where nobody talks to you, they ignore you, they're not friendly. I mean, what messages are we sending to families in the physical environment in which they are coming into? So the culture of belonging is about the physical environment, but it's also about the people that populate that physical environment. How friendly and warm and welcoming are they? What are they communicating? So here you see some examples that I got from my colleague Carola Oliva Olsen with her work, I believe in Silicon Valley up in San Jose. And so you can see pictures where there's a poster that says your home language is welcome here. You see the tree with all the family, and I believe this is from the Educare up there in Silicon Valley, where the family members are all in this tree. And there's pictures of the family. And on the right side, this is actually from the Educare in Long Beach. I took this picture where they talk about celebrating the cultures of the families. So there's ways that you can communicate through visuals that there is a cultural, the culture of belonging in your environment. One of the reasons that is mentioned, and maybe you'll go into it in some of your PD, is how a learner, and I taught college students for a long time, how you feel about the teacher, how you feel about the environment in which you're in will influence how open and receptive you are to learning from that person, to learning from this environment. If you feel that the environment is welcoming and nurturing, you're going to be more open to learning from that person, even if that person doesn't speak your home language or is part of your home culture. It's important. This is a socio-emotional context that we want to see occurring, a positive social emotional context that we want to see occurring in our settings. Next slide. This is another example from Educare, the infant toddler room up in the Silicon Valley. Here you have blocks, and I believe this is Vietnamese, correct me if I'm wrong, where there are pictures of the families. And this is a good example of how you could use these blocks. And children love, babies, they love to see pictures of themselves, and they love to see pictures of other babies and their family members. And these can be used to talk to the children. So this is another example. Next slide. And then finally, this is a family board that displays information that is being, tells the parent what's going on in the classroom. And this is from the personal oral language learning strategies that are, they're using those in the Fresno Language Learning Project, and Dr. Carola Oliva Olsen also uses it in her work, that she has done through Channel Islands. And so here you can see where they're showing to the parents, they're telling the parents through this bulletin board, this is what we're doing in the class. So we talked about the funds of knowledge, where we take the information from the home to the school. Here we're telling the parents, okay, this is what's going on in school. These are the kinds of things they're learning, with the idea being that the parents can reinforce these ideas. And things like songs and chants are very important in the POL strategies. And here you can see a parent interacting with their child about what might be going on in the school. So these are ways to really communicate to the parent, look, this is what we're doing. We value you. Let's work in partnership together. Next slide. So one of the main messages from this section is we have to really communicate with families, and we have to communicate as frequently as we can. When I was a preschool teacher, the drop-off and pickup times were like the golden hour, right? For parents to want to talk to you. It was like you're trying to say goodbye and hello to everybody and say goodbye to your children. And you got a parent that wants to talk to you, because that's about the only time they have. And hopefully they put down their cell phone when they come to pick up their child. That's a whole other discussion. But there are different ways to communicate with your family during drop-off and pickup times, if that's possible, through parent information boards, as we saw earlier. Some early educators and caregivers use texts and emails. Texting is a big deal. Everybody has a smartphone these days. You can have formal parent meetings where you can have an orientation meeting, and you can have individual conferences with parents. You know, often with pre-K, we go over the DRDP results with the parents, let them know. We show them artwork, we show them how the child is progressing. I know in COVID, we're not having open houses and big get-togethers, but those are also times when all the parents can come and see all the work and the accomplishments of children in the classroom. I've even heard of family childcare providers doing special occasions for Easter, where, of course, they're not doing it now, but where they would have events for the families of the children that they took care of. So this kind of idea of having this just party, basically, you know, and I don't know how many of you are engaged in home visits. When I was a preschool teacher, I was required to do home visits with my children. I think one a month for the children. And home visits are so eye-opening. When you do a home visit, I could talk about this topic for a long time, but when you do a home visit, you learn about the stresses and strains a family is under. One of the things that became very apparent to me when I was doing home visits was the pride that the child had in the teacher coming to their home and showing, and they would show things to me. When you do a home visit like that and you reach out to the families, you are strengthening that relationship that you have with your families. And when you strengthen the relationship with the families, you will have more effective learning taking place in your early learning setting. So that relationship piece matters quite a bit. And then again, I had mentioned this earlier, the use of interpreters and translators when needed. We really need to not use the older sibs. There's the research on older siblings translating or children translating for their parents is very common. And actually the research is quite mixed on this. Some of the children will say that if they feel that they're providing a valuable service by translating, and other children will feel that it is difficult for them. And it basically depends on the context as well in the individual case. But we really, I think, need to think about, our programs really need to think about the use of interpreters and translators when they are needed. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I know it was interesting in the beginning commentary that many of the people involved with this project were focusing on storybooks, and that everybody was going to get a book and books in different languages, because when we talk about dual language learners, we tend to talk about language and literacy, and we don't necessarily in terms of storybooks and reading. You know, that there's a big stress, and I don't want to downplay that. I don't want to say that's not important, but in my experience working with parents, what I really focused on, I mean, I like to focus on that too, but I really focused on everyday activity. What are the everyday activities that you are doing throughout the day where you can really incorporate the home language, where you can really expose a child to the home language? And this is going back to that red circle where I'm trying to communicate to the parents that it's the concept development that matters. Remember that? So the use of everyday routines as opportunities for language interaction. And when I did parent ed, we role played this and we did that. Walking to school, driving to school, hopefully they're not on their cell phone. Everybody's not on their cell phone. Listening to radio programs, TV programs in the home language. Don't sit the child in front of the television without you being there. Be there to interact with the child, to talk about what they're saying. Talk about your favorite memories growing up, so that the child can learn about the culture and where they come from. Talk about the children's interests and hobbies with them. Teach the children songs, poems, dances from your culture. My mother taught me del jarabe tapatío. That was a big deal when I was growing up with the 78 record, on the 78 record player. And she would dance around and I would dance around. And that is one of the things I've noticed being a quote unquote bicultural person is in my culture, everybody dances, everybody moves. And in other cultures, that's not true. You see, there's a cultural difference there. Cooking food. I really regret that we cannot cook so much with our children in the classroom because of safety reasons. I really regret that in Head Start, they can't, the home visitors can't eat the food that the parents offer them because inevitably the parents offer them food. But the main thing I would try to communicate to the parent is speak to your children, talk to your children. Here are opportunities, daily opportunities where you can speak to your child, and that by speaking and interacting with your child in the home language, that will be beneficial. That is the message. Next slide. So now we're going to hear from La Señora Galvan about her perspective on bilingual education. And in this video, you'll see some of the ideas we've been discussing this morning. The importance of language in maintaining a positive family relationship, the recognition that your home language connects you not only to your family, but also to your community. And as the last mother states on the video, with everything that is happening in life, if you know who you are and what is important to you and your children, it's the language and culture that is most important. So let's roll that video.
¿Cómo te fue en el trabajo, hijo?
Bien.
Tengo 3 hijos y uno de mis hijos, el mediano, no entiende mucho el español. Yo no entiendo el 100% inglés. Eso es frustrante, tanto para él como para mí, bastante.
For me personally, it was hard communication-wise because my mom would talk to me in Spanish and I would respond back to her in English. And sometimes she wouldn't understand what I would be saying, and sometimes I wouldn't understand what she would be saying. So I had to get him to translate for me.
Being in a bilingual program is fun because cuando hay personas como que no saben tanto español, yo puedo hablar con ellos en inglés.
La botella, la rosa. Oh, I have la rosa.
No. I think what's important about being bilingual is that you can be more connected with your family and with all the other Latinos and everybody else around you.
Ser parte de esa programa bilingüe es lo que les ayudó para quedarse con el español y también aprender el inglés. Y tienen los dos. Pueden hablar, escribir, leer en español y en inglés igualmente.
Erupciones, pero en inglés. Eruptions. Sí, sí, ajá. También es un cognado. Eruptions.
The child who speaks Spanish are actually coming to you with the value of 2 talented people. Speaking Spanish is definitely a second talent.
I'm able to communicate more with my cousins, especially with my grandma. In our own family, there's a divide between cousins who still speak Spanish and those who can't. And you see that when we're at our abuelita's house for Christmas and stuff. So you could see those who can communicate with her and those who can simply say hello to her.
I really love the way that you're using what you know in Spanish to try to make sense of English.
Es algo grandioso, algo para nuestros hijos, que ellos sepan el bilingüe.
El paraguas.
Porque mis hijos tienen los 2 idiomas, saben quién son. Con todo lo que pasa en la vida, si sabes quién eres y lo que es importante para ti y para ellos es parte de su lenguaje y su cultura, eso es lo que es más importante.
Okay, that was a video that was developed by the Sobrato Family Foundation. It's called the SEAL program. Some of you may have been involved with the SEAL program. There are actually a number of videos that are associated with that program, but I think it was important that you heard it from a parent's perspective, because parents will often, parents whose home language is not English, have very mixed feelings sometimes. I think that was brought up in one of the questions about maintaining the home language and how it can be maintained and what the value of bilingualism is. And so here you had parents that are really understanding that, and you see that from both the parent's perspective and the child's perspective. So we're going to move on now to the next section that focuses more on the teaching learning process and some of the issues involved with that. We will be stopping at 11:40. So we'll see how far we can get in this. And you will all have access to these slides. I know that many of you have been asking about that. So moving on to this issue of quality. This program is called Quality Start LA, okay? So what is good quality? And is good quality good enough for DLLs? Now, this has been under discussion in my area for a long time. We want to ensure that the environments where children are cared for and educated meet certain requirements, and that they will not only keep children safe and secure, but help them develop the skills and abilities they need to succeed in school. But underlying this quality idea in early learning is the notion that this foundation will lead to better academic achievement, or what we call in early childhood school readiness. But when we think about quality, we need to think about whose perspective are we using in defining the quality environments? What should they look like? Are we looking at it from the eyes of the parent? Are we looking at it from the eyes of the child? Or are we looking at it from the eyes of the experts who are telling us what is the important characteristics of the early learning setting? In general, quality has two major components. The first one focuses on what we call structural factors, such as the physical space, looking at health and safety aspects of the environment, putting the electrical plugs and the outlet covers in family childcare, child-sized furniture, et cetera, things of that nature. Then we have the process factors that focus more on the adult-child interaction. Are the adults responsive? Are they providing interesting and fun activities for the child? And we often assess this through the classroom assessment scoring system. Now on this slide, you can see that there's some general elements of quality care, including having enough adults, the ratio, right, for the age range of the children, and having activities that engage the child and support the development. Next slide, please. So when we define quality, we like to think, we have this saying here, not only in education, but in economics and in other aspects of life, that a rising tide lifts all boats. We like to think that, that when the water rises, all the boats rise up with it. But is that really true? But what about the conditions in which the boats are in? What materials are they made of? What is the weight and shape of the boat? Will a rising tide lift a catamaran the same way it lifts a rowboat? Will it lift a barge the same way it lifts a cruise boat? I'm no sailor, but I can tell you that I don't think that's the case. A rising tide will affect different boats differently. So why should we expect that raising the quality of an early childhood program will equally benefit the recipients of its service, i.e. the children who come from homes where little English is spoken and their culture is different from the mainstream? This notion that good quality is good quality regardless of who the children are, I don't dispute that. I think there are certain prerequisites that all good programs should meet, that all children will benefit from that. But there needs to be some modifications, adaptations, and different approaches that are particularly effective for dual language learners. And that is what this whole project is about. What are those? So how do we do that? Next slide. Let's look under the hood. What are the components? How do we begin to do that? How do we begin to think about that? The first thing that when programs approach me about doing training or technical assistance with respect to their programs, the first thing I ask them are, what are your program goals for language development? what do you want? Do you want to see the children develop English as quickly as possible? Because there are programs like that. Do you want to preserve the home language? What is the goal? What is the long-term goal? And this is difficult because remember I said earlier, language takes up to 7 years to learn a second language. So this is important to think about when we're talking to programs about what the goals are and what the continuity is between preschool and say the K through 12 system that they are going into. So what are the goals? Another important question that needs to be addressed is what is the capacity of the staff to speak the target language of the children? Are they bilingual in the target language of the children? Are they biliterate? Can they read it and write it in that target language? How familiar are they with the culture? So the qualifications or the capacities of the staff are something that needs to be considered in terms of the kind of programming that one could provide in a dual language program. Then there's the issue of understanding first and second language development in young children. And I'm hoping that the training that you receive really pays a lot of attention to this, because when I have gone out and done training on second language acquisition, what becomes apparent is that many people don't even know the basics of first language acquisition. So it's difficult to talk about second language acquisition with not having the knowledge base of first language acquisition. And this is something that I've been advocating for a long time. Even when I was at Cal State LA, we had a lot of curriculum fights about putting a language class, a first and second language acquisition courses in our program. Because we felt very strongly that people needed both, particularly in the communities in which they were going to go out and work. And then finally, we need to have resources and supports. And that's another big response that I get when I'm out doing professional development is people will say, oh, that sounds all well and good, but where are the materials? Where's the curriculum? Where are the supports? And that's why the QSLA project is really thinking about getting books out to you, because you really do need that. It's helpful in developing some of your curriculum supports. There is the multilingual starter guide that is going to be, it's listed on your research list. At the end of this program, you'll get that. That is for pre-K3, however. It's not for infants and toddlers. The Early Edge California has been trying really hard to put together a curated resources in a variety of languages. And it's on their website. It's on that multilingual learner website, but we still have a long ways to go. We still need more development in this area. Okay, next slide. Okay, now if you think about programming, and this really does not apply to family childcare providers. So you family childcare providers out there, this is more for classrooms and preschool classrooms or center-based care. There are two general approaches to developing language in English language learners and dual language learners. The first one is called the Balanced English and Home Language Development Approach. And the second one is the English language development with home language support. The first one can serve both monolingual speaking children and DLLs. And they're often called dual immersion programs, where the goal is to preserve and develop the child's home language, be it English or another language, while they are learning a second language. And in the English language development with home language support, the idea is to use the home language as a scaffold or as a way to support the acquisition of English. And so there's different pedagogies or teaching practice that may be associated with each one of these approaches. But the approach in both of them is to be intentional. Be clear about what your goal is for language development, and be clear that children, regardless of which approach you use, need support in the home language. Now, at the bottom of the slide, you will see that total English immersion is not recommended. And this comes from the California preschool guidelines. That's what we call the sink or swim approach. Some of you may have experienced the sink or swim approach. That can be very traumatizing to a young child, to be in a situation where they can't get their needs met. And you hear stories of how they can't go to the bathroom. They can't let people know that they need to go to the bathroom. It can be very traumatizing, and it's not recommended. And so hopefully we're not seeing children in those kinds of situations. Okay, next slide. Okay, one of the questions that often comes up is, what if I don't speak the child's home language? Well, the fact of the matter is, in our multilingual California, you're likely not to be able to speak the home language of some of the children that you're going to come in contact with. That's the reality. Even if you're a bilingual person in one language, say Mandarin or Spanish or Korean, you're not necessarily going to be having all Korean children or all Mandarin children or all Spanish-speaking children in your classroom or in your setting. So you will not necessarily be able to speak all the languages or know all the cultures of all the children that you come into contact with. So that's unlikely. So one of the things that I want to say to you is that regardless of what your native language is, be it English, be it another language, you can be effective with children whose languages you do not know. There are strategies and supports, and you're going to learn those in some of the PD that you have subsequent to this, that you can use. I would say that the first, very most important factor is how your attitude towards bilingualism and multiculturalism, regardless of what your language and culture is. That is one of the most important attributes of an educator when you're working in this arena. Do they see it as a positive? Do you see it as a positive or negative? If you see it as a negative, you may be more apt to not modify what you do for dual language learners. And it may be more difficult for you as an educator to change. It's like Dr. Cristina Alfaro from CSU San Diego said one time when I was on a panel with her that really struck me and has stuck with me. She said, it's really not about the language you speak or the culture that you come from or the color of your skin. It's really the color of your ideology. What is it that you believe? What is it that you think about the value of bilingualism? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I hope I'm not beating a dead horse, but this is the same idea here, the importance of beliefs. I have done a lot of work in the area of teacher competencies for DLLs. And we talk about knowledge, skills, and the different content areas and things that you can do. But where the rubber hits the road is in the importance of beliefs. And on the right-hand side, you see the beliefs that are outlined in the Teaching the Dual Language Learner book by Lisa and Mariela that I mentioned earlier, that children are capable of learning multiple languages, that the quality and quantity is very important, and that knowledge of the first language supports knowledge and acquisition of the second language. And that there are benefits associated with being bicultural and multicultural and bilingual. Now, on the left-hand side, you see a quote from my colleague, Linda Espinosa, and she says this over and over again. It's written in her book, and it's also in other material that she says, you really have to believe this in your bones. You really have to believe that this is a good thing, that it is not a problem to be solved, but it is a gift to be cherished. And so belief to me is the foundation for being an effective teacher with this population of children. Next slide. Okay, I just got a message. We only have 5 minutes. I'm going to go through this very quickly, and you're going to have access. I don't know, Jackie, if they're going to have access to the video that goes with this.
That will be the only challenge, to see how we're able to transmit all those videos in the PowerPoint, because we will be emailing. So we'll see. We'll have to be creative, but we'll see how it works.
You can always do the link, maybe.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, we were going to show you a video on these. These are general teaching strategies. These are not specific teaching strategies, and I'm going to go over them very quickly because we're running out of time. The issue of vocabulary development. is huge in this arena. Remember, I said we focus a lot on the storybooks. Why is this important? It's important because vocabulary development in early childhood predicts academic success, particularly with respect to reading. So we want to really have a rich language environment for these children because reading is the key to comprehension, and the ability to read well relates to how well a child will do in school. The idea of labeling objects in languages that the children speak. I don't know how many of you have done this. You go into classrooms and you will see them labeled and often color-coded in different, in the different languages. Labeling in both languages provides opportunities for the children to make a connection between the spoken word and the written word that they see on the chair, on the cubbies, in the different places where that is placed. Hopefully it's meaningful and that it's just not an afterthought, because I have walked into classrooms where they're labeled, but nobody ever talks to the children about the labels. So please do, if you're going to label, please talk to the children about the labeling. Another very important aspect is talking and having what we call extended discourse, a back and forth. Not this thing of, oh, good job, and then you move on to the next child, say good job, oh, I like the way you did that, then you move on to the next child. To the extent that you can have extended conversations of back and forth with a child. Research shows, particularly in the primary grades, that children only speak about 28 minutes in a curricular day. The teacher is the one that is talking all the time. And in many situations, and depending on the child's cultural background, they may be expected to only speak when spoken to. They will and because they're learning a new language, they may be reticent to speak. So it's even more important that we figure out ways and give them opportunities to practice their language, be it in their home language or in their native language. We can create different opportunities that way. Then we can also incorporate activities for small group and individual attention as well. Now, I want to define small group because I have gotten into back and forth with teachers about what constitutes a small group. And for me, 5 or less is a small group. And I've seen programs that have large, they consider a small group larger than that. You need to be able to have some individual attention given to the child when you have small group. The children also have opportunities to talk to each other when they're in small group. So that is an opportunity for this kind of extended discourse that we talked about before. And then finally, we need to think beyond language and literacy per se. I'm not saying that's not important, but there are other content areas, and you'll be exposed to other content areas, I hope. We have to recognize that children learn through different modalities. And so we need to think about what are the language supports in music and art and social studies and science and mathematics, and give them those opportunities. In movement, I love movement activities with the young children because they like to move around. Let's get the wiggles out. So I'm going to end there. We'll give you the link for the video. There is a video that accompanies these strategies that really illustrate what we're talking about here. So I'm going to stop there, Jackie, because I think this is the hard stop time you gave me.
And oh my goodness, Dr. Zepeda, you were amazing. Thank you so much again for such a wonderful presentation. We truly feel honored that you have agreed to be our madrina, our godmother for this project, and we value your passion, your expertise, your leadership, and your guidance in working with dual language learners and their families. Muchísimas gracias de todo corazón. So we really do appreciate your time with us this morning. And before we wrap up, we will entertain some additional questions, right? And then I'll do closing. So hang in there, we're almost done. And Thank you to everybody. You guys have all been troopers. You've been hanging on for the entire, I wasn't sure how this was going to work for 3 hours straight. So amazing. It's just, again, great testament to everybody's dedication, interest, and wanting to know more about how to support our dual language learners. So thank you so much. So let me pull up the chat box so we can entertain some more questions. And let's see, the first one. How can I get tools to advocate for bilingual curriculum in my child's preschool? I already joined their parent policy committee, but not sure if parents truly have a voice.
Yeah, I was trying to answer that question because I saw it in the Q&A, and my first thought was to really try to get some parent flyers. I think the issue really is to have a critical mass of parents that are really putting pressure on the program to say, this is what we really want. Their Head Start has a lot of parent flyers that talk about the benefits of bilingualism, the benefits of being in a dual immersion program. I think that if I were in your shoes, the first thing I would do is try to get some information and maybe try to get other parents, find out if other parents also want to do that. Parents play a big role. Sometimes parents can be the best advocates for the dual language learners. I mean, I could yell and scream and carry on and all that, but when parents step up to the plate, when parents call their state legislators, oh my God, it makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you. And the next question, as teachers, how can we help the child's home language along with dual language programs due to language loss? Or maybe how do we prevent language loss?
Well, I guess it depends on the age of the child. I mean, the idea is to value the language and culture, utilize that language and culture to the extent that you can in your program. Because it may be that the parents don't necessarily promote dual language for their child. Maybe the parent wants more English than the home language. You know, this is a very sensitive topic. And this may be controversial, but I have always felt that it's the parent's choice. When we're talking about parents and families, you have to remember that you do not walk in their shoes. You do not live in their homes. It is their choice of what they want for their child. You can talk about the value of bilingualism. You can talk up, and that's why I showed the want ads. That was very convincing to parents. But they are the decision makers, not you. And so you could incorporate the language and culture in your program to the extent that you can, but you cannot necessarily be that's as successful as you could be if the parents felt that it was important for the child to know the home language and culture.
Mm-hmm. So ultimately being respectful of our parents' standpoint on language. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, we have another question. Since the babies look for gestures, gesture cues, and I think there was something that you mentioned about paying attention to the mouth when adults speak, do you think the mask will affect their language acquisition and pronunciation?
Yes. Absolutely. That's why they had those clear, have you seen those clear masks? I don't know how helpful those are. Because the facial features for somebody that has studied infant development, oh my God, the face is so salient and it's so significant in the interaction between the infant and the adult. And so I don't think they require masks for under 2. It's over 2, correct? I think that's the case.
Yes, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
So I think it will affect it. I think that the clear mask probably would be the best alternative if that's possible. Mm-hmm. But there's no question in my mind that that's going to affect it.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question, how do I assess language problems with the DLL child? I find this difficult with the information about dual language. My job duties is to assess possible language problems in a child to prepare them for kinder.
Are you talking about language delay? I wonder if the person is talking about language delay.
They didn't specify, but there was another question similar about what are best practices for children with speech and language difficulties.
Yeah.
So they're kind of related.
Yeah, they are related. DLLs are over identified for language. Well, number one, language delay is one of the primary reasons why children get referred for special education. Okay. DLLs are over identified with language delay. You have to figure out whether it is an organic problem. We know that children with special needs can still be bilingual. And with language delay, you have to figure out whether it is a organic problem. It's some kind of problem that is biological in nature, systemic in nature, that is different from learning the language. So it is difficult, and it's hard depending on the age of the child, because you don't know whether it is the fact that they're bilingual and there's a delay in one, that one language is over here and another language is over there. So it is difficult, but it is an issue that is a very high concern in our field. It's been a high concern for a long time because we think that children are often misidentified. I don't know if I answered that question, but those are some of the issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, kind of like maybe just to expand on that, Dr. Zepeda, the other question that was very similar also goes on to say that the majority of the time, school districts are often asking parents to choose one language for therapy, only one language. So the majority of the time schools choose for parents or encourage parents to select English.
Yes. Yes, that's true. You have pediatricians that will say that. If you look at the American Association of Speech and Language Therapists, ASHA, they have this whole issue. They really address this whole issue of dual language. One of the things that we didn't talk about, and maybe it goes back to this attitudes and beliefs, is that school systems, sometimes you look for the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about special needs populations in particular, they don't want to identify them. They don't want, because of resource issues, they don't want to give them special attention. And so therefore they take the quote unquote, the path of least resistance. Hopefully with the education campaign, with hopefully California moving into a more bilingual and multilingual appreciation phase of our existence, the education system will be changed, but it's going to be, it's going to take time. We were an English only state for a long time. So unfortunately, I think that that's true, and I've seen it. So it's something, again, the PTA could be very important. Parents could be very important. The school system, through the local control funding formula, is supposed to have a parent advisory committee. That parent advisory committee could be very important in this discussion.
Yes, so I think we need a lot more people advocating for what's best for our children. And the more we can get access to the information, to the research, to the resources to really help make those right decisions. Yeah, so wonderful. Thank you. And then there's another question about identity development and the role that parents play.
What's the question? Just the role that parents play?
My question pertains to identity development of the child and the parents in the role.
It says of the parents in that role is the parents in that role secondary? Okay. I think I said, when the family is the first socializing agent. So the parents are very, very important to the young child between the ages of about 0 to 4 or 5. It's when the child starts to get older and the peer group becomes more important to the child, that they start to move away from the influence of the parent. They start to take on more of the influence of their peer group. They pay attention to their peer group, and certainly that occurs all through the teenage years. So the more that the child has exposure outside of the family and comes into contact with other quote unquote socializing agents, the less influence possibly the parents will have on that child. I don't think a parent is necessarily secondary. Sometimes we feel like we're secondary, but I'll tell you, even when they're teenagers, they want you around. They might not want to talk to you, but they want you around. So, and the research has shown that teenagers are more like their parents than we think they are, or they want to think they are. So I would not say that the parent influence is secondary. I think they are the primary role models for the children.
Thank you, Dr. Zepeda. So we'll do 2 more questions and then we'll save a little bit of time just to wrap up. So the next question, how can individualism focus on our larger, of our larger society and the cooperating interdependence value of the home culture be reconciled in our early learning community? How can we help our young ones?
Yeah, I'm telling COVID is changing our feelings about being collaborative and cooperative. This public health crisis that we are presently in is demonstrating very clearly how we have to take care of each other, how we have to be concerned about other people besides ourselves. You see that in the vaccination controversy. So that this is an opportunity for our wider society to really see the value of cooperation and consideration for the needs of everybody, their family members and outside. So, you know, individualism, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Every person can be president of the United States if they just work hard enough. These are mythologies, maybe not so much mythologies for Arnold Schwarzenegger or for other people like that, but for the most part, they kind of are. These are very ingrained in our society. It's going to take a long time for us to focus and be more collaborative. I think that the younger generation actually is demonstrating more collaboration and cooperation in the way that they think about life and they work with each other. So I'm hoping that one of the lessons learned from COVID is a better focus on collaboration and cooperation and interdependence.
And kind of for our final question and related to this whole conversation around COVID, any tips for connecting with other parents during COVID to advocate for this? Apparently in this situation, only 2 parents are allowed at a time during pickup, and parents are not allowed on school grounds, only allowed to pick up and drop off. And this is obviously the parent's first year to a new school and has not had an opportunity to connect with other parents. So any tips?
Well, if there would be one way to set up some kind of a text thread, and I don't know who would initiate that. I know Facebook is passé, but Facebook might be another way. I know family childcare providers often have Facebook groups. That may be one way, because we have to connect in the virtual space. You know, that's just the reality of the situation. So some way to begin to make those connections with other parents in the virtual world. If the parents already belong to maybe a church group or another kind of organization like that, that may be one way to do it as well. I know family childcare providers are very industrious in terms of trying to solicit work, where they go to the laundromat and they put flyers up at the laundromat and give information that way. That may be another way, is just the old fashioned, you know, put up a flyer somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So Dr. Zepeda, we have definitely run out of time for the Q&A. We are keeping track of all those questions. So if we didn't get to your question, we promise we will respond to you via email. So don't despair. We'll get right back to you. And then in terms of just closing comments, because we are now at the last kind of couple of minutes before we wrap up, we just want to thank each and every one of you for making time to join us today and for making dual language learners a priority in your life. With your commitment and dedication, we can make a difference and we can make an impact in the lives of dual language learners and what's necessary for their success. Before we end today's session, just please access the post-survey link. I believe Maria has already shared it in the chat box, but if you don't mind sharing it again, Maria, and then your feedback will be extremely valuable. So please do that. And we'll also follow up with an email to provide you the access to the resources. And I believe, Maria, you've also shared the link to the resource page, but we'll make sure everybody receives access to the PowerPoint, access to the resource page, as well as the link to the survey link to today's presentation. If you do include your name and email at the end of the survey, it'll qualify you for the raffle. There's going to be 4 gift cards that will raffle in the amount of $25 from Target, Amazon, and Starbucks. So please include your name if you'd like to enter that raffle. So we hope you found today's session informative and inspiring. We look forward to seeing you soon. Don't forget to take advantage of the upcoming DLL trainings by visiting the QSLA website under the Dual Language Learner Initiative tab. And just remember, we can't do this work without you. And once again, thank you to Dr. Zepeda. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today. And we wish you a great rest of the day. Take care.
Bye, everybody.